Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. This week, we are closing out Illinois Candidate Month. It has been 4 weeks of awesome candidates that I fully stand behind and love everything that they're doing. It's been so great to just learn about what the current Democratic platform is and what people are fighting for and championing this round of midterms. To round it out, we are going to have on Phil Andrew. I found Phil because I went to a candidate forum and my aunt had previously spoken about how she planned on voting for him. So I decided I'd give him a shot, I'd hear him out, and then I found out that we went to the same high school. And one thing about me is that I will always love a person that went to the same school as me. I love everything that my high school stood for the most part. And the alumni network at my high school is something that I cherish deeply. So I reached out to Phil after the candidate forum, and he graciously agreed to come on the podcast and talk about the 9th District. And I feel like this is a good kind of comparison when we're taking into account the episode with Bushra from earlier this month. They are two candidates running to represent the same district and are championing a lot of the same ideas, but come at it from completely different backgrounds. And I do think it's important to hear the diversity of thought in a race. You'll hear me say it later in the episode, but in this race for the 9th District, there are so many candidates, and they all come from such different backgrounds. And they all have such different stories about why they're running and the things that are important to them. So I really hope this is a good juxtaposition from the other episode from the 9th District with Bushra. Phil has just been so kind. He is incredibly nice and motivated to get things done, and I'm very excited to put this episode out. More about Phil. Phil Andrew is a former FBI special agent with 21 years of service in crisis management, negotiation, and behavioral analysis. Through his conflict resolution firm, PAX Group, he has led post-incident reviews and developed hate crime and violence prevention programs. He has been a lifelong advocate for gun violence prevention as a survivor of the Lori Dan attacks of 1988. He taught at Northwestern and DePaul and directed violence prevention for the Archdiocese of Chicago, the Skokie Holocaust Museum, and the City of Chicago. Phil lives in Wilmette with his wife, Michelle. They have 4 children, 3 serving in the U.S. Navy. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Phil Andrew. Phil, thank you so much for coming on. It is a pleasure to have you.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for doing this.
Of course. So you have lived a life that was shaped by service. You were a gun violence survivor. You went and made a career out of working in the FBI, and now you're taking the step to run for a more public-facing role in the 9th District of Illinois. What for you, out of all those, kind of service-oriented things you did, what was the moment that made you decide that this was the next step for you, running for office?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think really 2 things. One, that we can. That as I look at our lives, Michelle and I and our children, that we can do this. And I think for a lot of people right now, this is a moment just filled with a lot of anxiety and risk and fear. And for many people, and I would say this, like their job is to care for themselves and their families. And I think based on the work that, I've done and the place that my family is, that we're empty nesters, that 3 of our 4 children have joined the United States Navy. And they're off on their journeys. So I think it puts us in a position to ask ourselves, what more can we do in a healthy way to serve our community and our country? And then the second piece of that is really what's happening. And the polarization, the extremism, the lack of ability to get things done, and then particularly looking at the 9th Congressional District's makeup, as well as some of the other candidates, and not feeling inspired, not feeling hopeful, and not recognizing that these are the kind of experiences, qualities, and skills that I think this moment and these next few years need for us to really rescue our democracy in a lot of different ways. So it's really that intersection of the ability to do it and really feeling compelled that, wow, this is something that I really should do. And with my background in crisis management, counterterrorism, public corruption, many of those things seem like they're intersecting right now.
Right. Well, I think it's very interesting that you talk about, kind of looking at the field and feeling like, nobody there had your story, your background, because every single one of the candidates running in the Illinois 9 race are so vastly different from each other. Like everybody speaks to a completely different background and experience. And truly at this point, it feels like there is someone for everyone in this race.
And that's beautiful in a way. I wish that every district in the country had these kind of choices and this kind of competitiveness, because it actually, we might not be as deep a problem as we find ourselves if that was the case. I mean, part of the problem is that we don't have it competitive primaries, and they're not turning into competitive general elections, and we're seeing the sort of stalling out at the polarized places that we are.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. So, another thing that you said is that meaningful change starts with listening. What is something that you have heard from the people in Illinois 9 that has genuinely changed how you think about leadership?
It's great. Yes. And listening has been critical, whether it be in a hostage negotiation, source development, dealing with witnesses through the FBI, and certainly in a lot of the community work and engagement that my firm PAX Group does. And as I've gone around the district and listened, one of the two things I hear is, one is that people are deeply dissatisfied with politics today. And they don't believe in politicians. And they have a really, really low opinion of Congress. And there's a deep, deep frustration and almost hopelessness that our institutions and those in them are going to be able to find their way out. So it's definitely a moment where people want something different. And and I think that symptomatically we're seeing that in reaching to the current administration and some of the people that the electorate have turned to. But what they really want is somebody they can trust, and they really want a value-driven strategy for getting things done, and they want it without the rancor. They just don't want any more divisiveness. But that's tempered with, they really want to see somebody very serious and fighting, like
Hmm.
fighting for that change, but not necessarily fighting each other, using um, some common ground to start the conversation to get things done.
Right. Well, this is a big change for the people of Illinois 9, where Jan Schakowsky has represented this district since what, 1999? That's the same year I was born. I physically represent how long Jan Schakowsky has represented this district. Like people are waiting and ready for a big change. And I think you're right. Like there's people in this district don't seem to want somebody who's going to cause even more divisiveness, but I think people are ready for a fighter, because for all the good things Jan Schakowsky did, she never really stuck her neck out, which that's fine. That's her prerogative. But I think people are, kind of looking for that somebody who's willing to go a little bit further than Jan Schakowsky was.
Well, one of the things that I hear a lot is, whether they liked Jan or not, people deeply appreciated her constituent service.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is something that I recognize, that the team that she's put in place and some of those staff members that have a deep, deep understanding of how to get things done within the government is critical. And this isn't a time in a crisis to be kind of trading those folks out. If they've got this deep knowledge and relationship with Social Security, with the passport office, Department of State, all these things that when people need it, they need it right away, and they need
Right.
somebody who can reach into government and get it done. So that has been universal. People have deeply respected her for that. But I think that the district has changed, that this is a
Yeah.
very gerryman district. I mean, you have uptown and you have areas of this city that are deeply violence affected, that have schools that have multiple languages. And then you have some of the, very wealthy and highest performing school districts. So it's interesting how we've been matched together in the ninth. And I also think that's the opportunity, that because we're
Right.
so diverse, because we represent so many different cultures and communities, recognizing what we share and focusing on that, I think that's part of the expectation of the electorate this year.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you've worked in high pressure environments. You mentioned being a hostage negotiator. There's certainly nothing very calming about that, but you're working in environments where literally every decision matters. How has that past experience shaped how you handle uncertainty and conflict in politics?
Hmm. There's an old saying in hostage negotiation that when in crisis, tend to relationships. And you mentioned it before, just this notion of listening and really understanding and being with people where they're at is very helpful in building a level of trust. But there's also an element of where you start a conversation. And if you start a conversation on an extreme, particularly in a crisis, it's very unlikely that you're going to build the kind of connectivity that you need for that next move, so that you're moving in unison to try to accomplish things. So for me, that not only building the team, to take on this race, but everything that I've learned with our team at PAX Group, which is very diverse and brings a lot of different expertises under one kind of banner, PAX, and the work that I did in hostage negotiation and even major case management at the FBI, is that teams are really important and you have to work on the fundamentals. How you grow that team and interact with somebody with a very different idea or a very different vantage point is critical. And that doesn't mean giving up on your own values. It actually means leading with values that mean that you want to work with others to get things done.
Right. No, absolutely. So you've also described your campaign in general as principled and mission driven. To you, what does principled leadership mean in an age of what I'm sure we can agree is political chaos?
Yes, for me, it's very fundamental right now that I feel like our democracy, democratic institutions, and many of those that are working in them are under attack. That there is a sense of lawlessness in the conduct of this administration, not doing what Congress says, ignoring court orders, the deployment of the National Guard and ICE without any coordination whatsoever with local, state, and other federal law enforcement authorities. This is the sort of stuff that really undermines cooperation and brings down trust and then actually creates way more problems. So that the idea of one living with a value, and for me, one of the values is that I took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution. And being an FBI agent, being a special agent, one of the things that you learn is that the special part of being an agent, yeah, it comes with a lot of training. Yes, being very, very capable with a firearm and other tactics is critical. But what you learn is that the special part is limited, that your powers are limited by the Constitution, by federal law, and then agency regulations that really dictate how you operate. And how you're operating is create high level trust so that you can swear to it in a court and a jury and a judge can count on what you're saying. And secondly, that you're following the rules. You're guided by the Constitution. So that part for me principally is very fundamental, that there are some guidelines around public service that you are putting others before, your country before yourself, that's really critical. And that second piece that you mentioned about what it means to be mission driven is to have a very, very clear focus and strategy on how you're going to accomplish things. What is the goal? Are we here to elevate, to create an economy, to create a healthcare system, to create an environment in a workplace that people can thrive, that we grow, that there's a element of humanity, dignity, and fairness? If those are the goals, then it informs the way that you would look at legislation, how you would operate. So that's the mission strategy piece for me, is if you bring those values to a clear focus, then that would guide a lot of your decision making, particularly at a time when money and influence and domestic and international interference, like people that are trying to amplify some of the divisiveness, it's really important to be focused.
Right. You mentioned how people are feel a little frustrated and looking down at Congress, and I feel like some of that is because of the lack of mission behind a lot of people that are elected. You get into office and you sit there for enough terms, you kind of lose the whole reason you ran in the first place. Like, I think about that a lot with our Senator Durbin. He's been there since 1982. Like, I couldn't tell you what he really stands for. Like, I understand some of his big issues that he constantly is fighting for, such as immigration, but like, I can't imagine that's what he originally ran for in 1982. So it's nice to have people that are going in there with a clear vision of what being in Congress is supposed to mean and what you are supposed to deliver to the people in your district.
That's right. Well, I think part of that is getting lost a little in the kind of a careerism of politics. That in crisis management, one of the things is like you like to go in, solve some problems, create some clear strategies and communication, and then get on with the
Right.
work. And if the goal is to continue to be reelected and to build seniority or build a power base and not necessarily focus on getting things done, that to me is kind of a missed mission. And look, I'm stepping into this realm because I feel deeply there's some things that need to be done, and I'd like to accomplish those things. But I also would be fearless in taking a vote and taking a stand that casted me out of politics. And
Right.
sometimes that's what we require. Sometimes you're the change agent that really needs to lead in the crisis. And if it's political survival that is your mission, you're not going to be serving the people very well.
Right. Absolutely. So you've worked in all these positions and jobs where trust and accountability is practically everything to what you've done. How would you bring that same approach to restoring confidence in government and protecting democracy?
I think that the key thing really is to bring a level of integrity to the work and to engage people so that they understand where you're coming from, but you're also listening and understanding where they're coming from. So much of this becomes about taking an extreme position that helps fundraise or riles a base. So that I don't find that to be very effective in building the kind of base you need to get things done and including people in that process. And I think the ninth really represents a unique opportunity there because we have so many great assets, whether it be the universities, centers of research, innovation areas, but what we're not seeing is, I think, is some of our electeds and other government leaders seeing the regional opportunities. Like, this can't just be about me, my party, or the people that support me. There's really has to be about the ninth and how the ninth relates to this larger Chicago metro area and all of the opportunities that creates when we think of regional growth. When we think about sustainable energy and power grids and, the opportunities and enjoyment and sustainable efforts around our lakefront and our water source it is unique to this area. But there's so many things that we could do if we thought of how we improve Chicago, the Chicago area, its infrastructure, its access to healthcare, its education, and then how we can lead kind of the nation and the world. But you have to be collaborative. You have to think that, hey, this isn't just about elevating myself in this moment. This is about how we lift people up, strategize, and work together to create what we envision.
I oscillate back and forth between, is it better to have a representative that everybody in the United States knows their name and knows who they are? Or is it better to have somebody that represents you that is, kind of flying under the radar and is only known locally? That's something that I'm still kind of debating on. I'm not really sure where I where I fall on it, but I think you're right. Like, it does come with some collaboration, and the best ideas are typically made in groups, albeit ones that don't experience groupthink. But it is good to be collaborative and think about elevating all of Illinois and all of, say, the Midwest. And especially in the Midwest, there's a lot of issues that we can all come together on, like you said, with the Great Lakes. That's something that I talked about with another guest, how that's one way where we could collaborate with states like Indiana and Michigan and Wisconsin and like create that, kind of cross state lines collaboration and lifting up our area.
I agree. I think the answer is really yes and. Yes, you need to be working behind the scenes to create those opportunities. And sometimes that is where the hard work is done, is being at tables, listening, building, holding people accountable as you move through the project cycle, but also thinking about, well, how do we elevate this? How's this replicable? And that's kind of the beauty of the way the American system was set up. We've got 50 states, we got 50 opportunities to experiment. And what was supposed to happen is as we had these state experiments, that some of these best thoughts, these best ideas, these best practices, things that are proven to work, that they're embraced, by our federal system. And we've lost that. And and this is a real hiccup, and that's, or even worse, a real step back in the way that we are treating science and research, and the way that we're, um, uh, causing states to come up, sort of face off against each other around privacy rights and women's healthcare rights. This isn't how it was designed, to go to war with each other. It was designed to incubate these great ideas that only a democracy, only a place where capital can meet ideas and people can freely collaborate to bring the best, and then let that free market of those systems push it up and be embraced. So I think it's the yes and. Yeah, do the hard work, behind the scenes to get it done, and then elevate it. Sometimes you got to wave your arms to get it. But I think most
Right.
people in this country are attracted to progress, efficiency. They want to know that their government is nimble and responsive and has a strategy that is leading the way. And I think that we're not communicating that. Two, we're showing how highly dysfunctional it could be. And the rancor of only listening to the extremes leaves a lot of people out.
Right, right, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you talked about how some of the best ideas start at the state level. I don't know if you're aware of who Patrick Hanley is. He's running for Illinois Senate 9th District. He came on and he said the same exact thing about how the best ideas come from state legislatures that can then be implemented nationwide. So it's refreshing that you subscribe to that same ideology because you're right. The best ideas come from the states and they are experiments. Like they're let's see if it works on, in this state. And if it does, people will take it to the national level.
That's right. That's right. And, knowing when you have a good idea and not thinking so partisanly or politically about how you score a point, but rather how you move forward together, that is just such a fundamental thing.
Right.
We could have had a thoughtful immigration policy. This is not something that had to be kicked down the road till we had a crisis, and it certainly doesn't require the response that it gets. But yes, we should have sealed up the borders. We should know who's coming in the country. Absolutely. Violent criminals that are here illegally, we should be getting out of the country. I don't think anybody disagrees about these things.
Right.
But
Right.
why weren't we working around the structure to implement those ideas? And I
Right.
think that's what people absolutely have no more tolerance for.
Right.
People in government who are in it to score political points and not bring good ideas that have been proven and then advocate and support those.
Right. So, one thing you said to me in our introductory call that I found very interesting was that the nation will thrive if it provides for people's safety. What does that look like in practice, not just on the streets, but also, like you mentioned in our earlier chat, classrooms, workplaces, communities that have lost trust in the systems that are meant to protect them?
Yes. Well, safety comes in so many ways. And at my consultancy, PAX Group, we say safe people thrive. And we mean from, a young girl in a math class, her fearlessness in raising her hand to answer or ask a question. That's an example, where someone feels safe enough to be engaged, that they will thrive, that she's going to learn math better, right? In the same way that somebody sitting in a classroom is in fear of violence.
Hmm.
We have absolutely a competitive disadvantage in this country because of the ambient and serious levels of violence. Some of that emanates from gun violence, but also if you think about in the insecure, the lack of security that comes from worrying about healthcare or a economic condition where you can't plan. And then the reality is with these tariffs, without clear federal guidance on a strategy for growing sustainable energy. Big companies like our motor companies, the car companies of America, Ford Motor, how did they build a plan to be competitive in the next decades and build the kind of workforce that we need if
Right.
we can't give them a clear roadmap of how we're going to make these investments? So I think when we think about security and we think about safety, yes, it's physical security, but also with our health, our environment, our schools, and the economic opportunities. And I talk to a lot of young people that feel like the American dream is sort of out of reach. They're not seeing where they can buy a home or that they're going to find the kind of job that's going to pay and that they can be thinking about building a family. And if that's the case, like that is very insecure, and the anxiety and kind of hopelessness that comes with that. So much I know in crisis planning that people will build confidence and engage when they understand that there's some coherent plan. And I think that's one of the things that we have been really lacking, whether it's taking on the debt or how we're going to support Social Security, how we're going to provide for affordable and quality health care for people so that they don't have to worry about that when they're making decisions about
Right.
their jobs and their lives. All of those things are very critical in terms of providing for people's safety and security.
Right. So you're a negotiator by trade. Do you plan to use those negotiation skills to help move Congress past this performative politics thing? And if so, how do you plan to use those negotiation skills?
Yes. Well, I've learned so much, from the moment that I was in the kitchen of my childhood home and negotiating with a hostage taker to let my parents go, to negotiating with kidnappers and international terrorist organizations. And now at PAX Group, the work that we do, really negotiating with very, very, you know, difficult circumstances and environments and guiding leadership as they make those decisions. That the things that I know about it is one, there's an element that you have to take care of yourself. You know, you have to be healthy and strong and prepared to step into space in ways that elevate others. So it first starts with yourself. Second is building a strong team. And one of the things that makes me very hopeful about this moment, as we're approaching these midterms election, is I see a lot of folks like me running. I see former FBI, former national security professionals, former military, former law enforcement and intel folks that took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and really see this as a critical moment. And I'm looking forward to arriving in Washington on January 2027 and saying, let's get to work. And seeing people that I'm on a team with that have a similar vision for what the priorities are and have a similar approach that it's country first and not, hey, how can I elevate myself and get myself reelected? So that is all elements of negotiation of how do you bring yourself, how do you try to create that team, and then how does that team engage in the work of the nation in ways that recognize the opportunities, but staying focused and value driven so that you're not giving up important values just to score political points, but rather staying true to sometimes it's hard work. You have to show up in Washington, sit down with people you disagree with, and keep hammering this out. And it seems like a lost skill when I think of major things that have been done by Congress, like the 1968 Civil Rights Act. Literally, Lyndon Johnson put everybody on the then presidential yacht in leadership and told the captain, we're not going ashore until we have this hammered out.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
That's
that
hilarious.
is. Could you
That's a
imagine
good one,
if,
yeah.
yeah, could you imagine what that would look like today if we had leaders that said, hey, leadership, come to Camp David, come to wherever, and you cannot leave until we have this worked out. And then we can turn to the country and say, we've got this work done.
My only worry with that is that people wouldn't show up. Like, that's kind of where we're at, is that you could say, hey, everybody come to my yacht. Some people are not going to show up, I fear. But that is a great story. And that's a pretty principled way of handling issues.
Well, and I think you're right. Like it's probably lofty to think like, hey, would you just come over here? But so much work. And this is what I appreciate in negotiation, the pre-work, the building the rapport and the trust that you do have the kind of relationship where you're like, hey, can you sit down, or what circumstances would you sit down in?
Right.
And, whether I'm training local police, in Chicago, or teaching, the new crop of national security professionals, empathy is an incredibly powerful and effective way of getting things done, because you first have to think about your counterpart. What is it they need? And it might not look like for local police, sometimes when the police lights are out and the tape is up, that's a very difficult time for someone to step out in their house and be seen by their neighborhood, talking to police. They're the one that has to stay in that neighborhood after the police leave. So if police get that, they might create a more private, safer opportunity for that community member to share the information that they'd like to, but not in front of others. And I think there's something to glean from that. When we think of political, in even all the international diplomacy, sometimes saving face, having some dignity, the ability to engage someone in ways that will be effective and safe for them, and creating those opportunities is critical. And I just don't think this environment has really been very supportive of thinking about the fundamentals of human nature in the way that you have to get things done. And I think that Congress could use a healthy dose of it. And I think our political dialogue could certainly help use a healthy dose of it.
Right, absolutely. So public safety and also democracy both depend on accountability. What does accountability mean to you in government, and how do we enforce it in a system that nowadays tends to reward power over principle?
Yes. Wow, we've learned a lot about what it takes to increase accountability in government, in putting in IGs, inspector generals, that are the first early indicators of things that maybe are mismanagement or fraud or abuse. And unfortunately, this administration removed them all from every agency.
And
Um,
that's something that's like almost been forgotten. Like, that was one of the first things that happened, and so much crazy shit has happened since that, like, people just forgot about that.
It is, I mean, we've worked very hard to build a culture where IGs
Right.
could look and are monitoring and using applications, and sometimes even AI in different places to just monitor. So things could be redlined, and doesn't mean it was wrong, but it means that it does require additional attention, and educating workforces and creating a culture where those things are improper. So really, we've seen that completely flipped. We're removing IGs, the Justice Department, and the way it's being used as a political tool, as opposed to a tool of accountability to create trust and predictability within a system. Those things are being flipped on their heads. And I think that's another reason what's drawing me into this is how critically important it is to stop and reverse that and show the American public and young people who are interested in public service that is not the case. That is when you're saying you'd like to be in public service, that there should be a higher level of integrity placed on you. There's a higher level of expectation of service from you, not the opposite. This isn't where you're taking advantage of things. But we've seen this erode. We've got insider trading with Congress people. Many are going to Congress and making money, making more money than they ever have because they're using their position of really of service as an opportunity to self-serve. And that just takes a big dive. The number of people, you're doing this because you want to get rich. And no, I want to do this because I want to contribute like I have my whole life. I believe in service. So I think we've got to stop some of those things like insider trading, get the money out of politics, this revolving door between going into government and then going into lobbying, where you're using relationships and inflating interests over the data, over the clear insights that say this is our path forward, but because of money and influence, we're delaying that or getting off the rails. And these are all things I think that are important around accountability, but at a very, very pointed level, what we're seeing with ICE, the deployment of ICE in this way, one, the way that ICE has grown so quickly, their hiring practices, who they're hiring, how they're training them, the inability to do full background checks on the people that they're hiring, that very, very low or completely ignored standards. All of this goes into lack of accountability, not to mention what we're seeing them do on the street. The
Right.
very unprofessional, lawless behavior, masking them, all degrade any kind of culture of accountability. So I've been telling people, hey, like as you're seeing these ICE action take place, please just treat it like a bank robbery. Be a
Right.
good witness. Keep yourself safe. But accountability comes from our ability to document and film from safe, credible places that you can say, yep, I was operating this phone. It was fully operational. And at such and such a time, I turned it on. And this is a real and accurate copy of what took place. That's the sort of thing that brings it into court. So that's when I think of accountability, I think of it very operational right now as well. We need to be thinking and preparing for bringing accountability to these actions that we're seeing.
Well, that's what, I've yet to see ICE in Chicago. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I've seen them meandering around, but I haven't seen them in person, doing the crazy stuff that has been documented. But I promised myself a few months ago that if I ever saw that, I would not be somebody that just kept walking down the street. I told myself, and I'm standing by that I will stand there and record because it is so important to document this stuff. Because ultimately, I believe, and I think you believe, that this too shall pass. We will get to a time where there will be some sort of accountability for the lawless stuff that we're seeing right now.
Yes. And we have to work toward that moment. I mean, so much
Right.
of that is the work now of winning the midterms, but also winning the midterms with the right people who understand what
Right.
that accountability looks like.
Right.
And those are big differentiators. Those are big differentiators in this race and races across the country. The moments of people just stepping up and being that kind of legislator that can step on the Capitol steps and say, I'm introducing a bill on Capitol Hill and release a press release. Those have slipped away. We've seen January 6th. We've seen the level of violence. They've seen this sort of nefarious activity that you need people with some level of operational experience and deep understanding of the federal apparatus and federal government and federal institutions so they can reach in there and really follow the money that Congress is appropriating and bringing in a level of accountability for how that is utilized. And that's different. That doesn't always happen in in a hearing chamber in front of CNN. Some of that is
Right.
actually in the belly of the beast, in agencies, working directly
Right.
with people who are working there. And I'll tell you what, I'm hearing from my colleagues, they're hoping, they are holding down while they can, and they're hoping that the cavalry is coming, that serious people are coming to bring a level of accountability and support because they can't hang on forever.
I have friends that still work in the federal government. I have parents of some of my friends that work in the federal government, and some of them are considering early retirement. And I'm like, please, like, it's just please wait until after the midterms, like, and let's see if things get better. Because you're right. It's a very daunting thing to think about waiting 4 whole years as structures are literally being dismantled right in front of us to think like you could last that entire time. Like, that's a pretty daunting task.
Yes. And so much of this is like almost like a personal decision based on where people are in their life. Young people with young families that cannot risk income. That is a hard thing to put on them. And that's why I say, this was a difficult decision for my family. Michelle and I talked about this a lot, but we felt like we were in a good position because of where our children, our family is, that we could do this hard work and sustain this hard work.
Right.
And I would not wish this on people who are in a different place in their life where they don't have this sort of stability. We worked hard to get it, but I think it creates that opportunity. And I can see why some people in the military and other places are making these choices because, it's very hard to take on that kind of hard, difficult, dangerous, both reputationally and sometimes even physically dangerous work
Right.
without a good support system.
Right.
And that's a lot of what the work we do at PAX is helping organizations understand that hard work, to be resilient in hard work, you need a strong team and you need your support systems. But if you're worried about the instability of your work and the risk that it's creating, that is really hard for you to kind of hold and stay the line. But there's many folks that are in different positions and they're
Right.
doing the best they can under these very, very difficult circumstances. And that's part of what motivates me to get there soon to help them.
Right. You did mention there, and I've seen it too. There's a massive influx of ex-federal workers, intelligence workers, like you name it. And maybe it's just because I'm paying closer attention, but I feel like there are so many more this year. Why do you think that is?
I think that we have done so much damage to the idea of public service. It's one thing to have a discussion of like efficiency, the way that Doge went after people
Right.
who, very similar to me, had made a oath to defend and protect the
Right.
Constitution, honorably forwent better paying jobs in the private sector because they really had a strong sense of service, that they wanted to do something for their country. And that is honorable. And we need to show people that that's honorable. This country depends on a steady flow of smart young people who believe in service. And I think we need to elevate that, whether it be in the classroom with teachers, whether it be first responders and healthcare workers, and certainly in the federal government and other service areas. That we thought they were all heroes during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
We saw how we responded to them after 9/11, those folks that raised their hand and got into the fray, knowing that, hey, I don't want to see this happen to my country again. And I think that this administration has done a lot of damage to the idea of what service is like and the personal risk to self.
Right.
What Musk did at Doge, yes, everybody's against corruption and waste. And we should focus on where we can find that, you know? But the way they went about it is so awful. And it was so personalizing and trying to actually demonize government workers,
Right.
um, that many who are just doing amazing stuff and had made sacrifices to be there. In the same way that we're demonizing migrants without
Right.
understanding whether these are migrants here that have contributed to the economy in really, really meaningful and effective ways versus being a violent criminal and somebody that's actually causing damage to our communities.
Right. That whole era of Doge would just felt so dystopian. Like I said, I have friends that currently work for the federal government, and like I remember checking in with them every couple of days and being like, "Hey, do you still have a job? Like, just making sure everything's fine because they were literally walking into work every day being like, I wonder if today's going to be my last day. That
Yes.
should be, that should never cross anyone's mind, let alone a federal worker where they're supposed to have protections to not be fired on a whim.
Yes. Well, it's very destabilizing. And
Right.
again, I think in the context of a strategy of saying, hey, here's where we're going, and we're going to be, shifting resources because our priorities are changing, and then communicating that in ways. But this was willy nilly. This was
Right.
keyword searches. This was ideologically motivated and had nothing to do with guiding serious investment in health and our national security interests, using soft power to win the hearts and minds of people, where our adversaries, China and Russia and a whole host of other, national security concerns, they're backfilling that as we're pulling out and we're letting AIDS and famine and health and education, nothing like somebody experiencing their children, their family being saved by something that had an American flag on it. And what that means for countering terror and building bridges where the United States could have greater interest to instill democracy. These are
Right.
things were built for a long time. Now, that's very different than a wasteful program, that really is pretty easy to identify and phase out. And I don't think we needed to demonize federal employees, to do
Right.
that. Federal
Right. Well,
employees, in my account, we were the first to know where the waste and fraud was. And if anybody cared and asked, we could point it out. And by the
right.
way, that's the exact thing is true in migrant communities. Migrant communities are disproportionately impacted by criminals and
Mm-hmm.
taken advantage of, whether it be sexual exploitation or usury wages, being denied worker rights. They're the first ones to know who the fraudsters are, who the bad actors are. And if we don't have a trusted relationship where they can say, there he is, that's the guy that's terrorized us, that's the person who's exploiting. And law enforcement not having that relationship now because of the damage that ICE has done, it's destabilizing and
Right.
in and of itself wasteful.
Absolutely. So let's start to close it up and talk about some some more hopeful things. So you've seen people at their best, you've seen people at their worst. What gives you faith that our country can still find common ground? Or is there anything that gives you faith that our country can still find common ground?
Yes, I mean, take it from my perspective, as I've been a hostage negotiator. I've arrived at scenes where violence has already taken place. People have already made threats. Demands are being made that are outlandish, right? I've shot at the police and I'm holding somebody and I want a helicopter and money and a ticket out of town, or I want all my compatriots released, or, they're cutting off an ear. So I've been to some pretty dire circumstances, and more times than not, in fact, at an incredibly high rate, we have resolved those peacefully and successfully. You know, I'm hopeful in nature, and I've experienced a lot where if you bring the right skills at the right time, with the right motivation, that you can actually make a lot of impact. But secondly, I just find us to be an incredibly resilient species. I think the US and our communities and our people are incredibly resilient. Some of that comes from our our migrant background. That because we are a collection point of people who have wanted something better, that they've come here arriving at our shores and into this country with a hope, with a dream, with something better. They're leaving violence. And this has been the case for eons. So it's part of our DNA that we, when going gets tough, sometimes we get tougher and we get going. And I think some of this is people recognizing that. So that's what I'm hearing in the campaign, is that people have had enough, but they aren't sure exactly where to go. And that's why it's so critical now to just have the fundamentals of clear value-based leadership, where somebody's going to lead with integrity And yes, there's some things we're going to have to figure out on the way. There are
Right.
going to be some compromises, but it should not be left that the work is undone. We can have a coherent migrant and immigration policy. We can absolutely have collaborative strategies that produce for greater public safety. And you name the problem, we can take on our power grid. We can take on sustainability. We can take on national security, but it cannot be that we are unclear about what we believe and who we support and what that support looks like, whether it be in Ukraine or peace in the Middle East. We have to be very, very clear about what we believe and have a laser focus on the vision for getting
Right.
there.
Absolutely. Right now, things can feel very fragile. Democracy feels like it's crumbling sometimes right before our eyes. Politics feels very performative a lot of the time. What still gives you hope about public service and the people who choose it?
I think a lot of inspiration comes from young people who, I think that this is a country that has always valued service. I think that, that certainly was my experience, growing up with a lot of opportunity and recognizing that that came with a responsibility and really almost a moral obligation to serve others. But I think that people are also figuring out that as they experience challenge and hardship and crisis, that one of the powerful things that can come from that is using those experiences to help and serve others. And I see that every day, in the way that people have responded to this campaign, the young people that are getting involved in it, but even just the thank you for doing this. I have been amazed at the level of gratitude for even stepping into the fray here, and I see that across the board. But finally, is like, in some ways we don't have a choice. That if we do nothing, we will continue to get, and it will continue to be polarized. So I think people are recognizing that democracy does require participation. And, it will vary in people's life cycles. When you're battling with just trying to serve a young family or dealing with sick parents and, kind of in this sandwich generation, where our attention goes can vary. But what we're all starting to feel like is that, wow, we're really in this together. Des- Despite social media, despite all these forces that try to divide us and terrify us into not being engaged with each other, that the future is ours, and
Right.
and we need to work together to really bring ourselves into it in safe, effective, and thriving ways.
Right. Well, that's how I felt at the No King's protest on the 18th. I got there and I genuinely had tears in my eyes. And I'm not a crier. I'm not a very emotional person, but getting there and seeing all of those people like gathered here for the same reason and going like, oh my goodness, like we are all here for the same reason. We are all standing together. Like it just felt so touching and beautiful. And I know that sounds so silly, but like it's moments like those that make me see that, stepping up and doing the right thing, it matters.
Yes, this is so fundamental to safety. Like, the notion of the street that's watched has less crime. Very, very fundamental. Like, no kings, and anywhere I think that people step out and recognize they are not alone. That in reality we do have this shared concern, and we
Right.
might start the conversation in different places, but that we really have way more that connects us than divides us.
Right.
And I think it is hopeful. And I'm glad you had that experience. And I think it is a building block for doing the next thing.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Softball last question. What is your favorite restaurant in the Ninth District?
Gosh, there are a lot to choose from. And I am eating a lot in the ninth. We sort
Mm-hmm.
of have said we will eat, if we're eating out, we're eating in the ninth. And I love some of the ethnic restaurants around, the Tui corridor.
Yeah.
Rogers Park and Uptown have some amazing, choices that are very, very authentic. We have a very thriving restaurant culture that really has grown up in the last decade in Wilmette, and you
Oh,
see
yeah.
that kind of popping up. But boy, Lefty's Pizza is
Okay.
something that, like, if I go a whole week without Lefty's Pizza, and amazing place. They kind of caramelize, they sort of burn the cheese crust a little bit, and I've been known to overeat. I'm always having that extra slice of Lefties. So and that's a favorite in our house.
All right, I'm gonna have to investigate that. That sounds really, really good though. The burnt cheese. That's hitting. All right, well, that is all I have for you. Is there anything else you feel like I might have missed?
This has been great. Thank you. I really appreciate
No,
the
of
opportunity.
course.
And the spirit of this. More than ever, we need quality engagement, and I think that you were right to really be focused on accountability. Folks are not going to trust and believe in each other, and certainly in our institutions and our democracy. But part of that is us stepping up and getting back into the public square and being engaged with each other.
Right. I mean, come on, Phil. That's my Loyola Academy education. That's my cura personalis coming through. Care for the entire being.
I love it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I will have your website, your social media will all be linked in the show notes so that people are able to follow you, donate, keep up to date with anything that you're doing. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Glad to be with you. Let's do it again.
When you win in March, when you win in March, you can come back in and give me all the dirty details about what's going on the campaign trail. All right, thank you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. I hope you enjoyed Illinois Candidate Month as much as I did. This was not something I was planning to do, but as there were so many Illinois candidates that wanted to come on, I figured it was best to just condense it all into 1 month and get as many of these people on in the shortest amount of time so that everybody has the opportunity to listen to these before the primary election happens in Illinois in March. Now, this is not the end of candidate episodes. I still have quite a few candidates that have been willing to come on, some from Illinois, some from other states. I have one from New York coming on. I've got a Washington maybe line up. I've got a Pennsylvania potentially lined up. So we are chugging along with the candidate episodes. And if you have a candidate that you would like to see come on, I'm happy to take suggestions. The other thing I do want to say is that in the 9th congressional race, I mentioned that it is a very, very wide field. I reached out to all of the people that were consistently at events. So that would be, things like candidate forums and the debates that they have. There will be one more person from the 9th district, I believe, coming on later in December or early January. There was one candidate, however, who I was just very disappointed in their response, and that candidate was Laura Fine. Laura Fine is currently my state senator. I had reached out to her when I first started doing candidate episodes, thinking it would be an easy win, considering I am a current constituent. They did not answer that email. I sent another email as I was starting to plan for candidate month of November. Her team said yes. They set up a time for her to call me, which was a Friday at 4 p.m., and then there was no call. And in addition to there being no call, there was no email to say, hey, she's running late. Hey, we have to cancel. There was absolutely zero communication. And what I will say is that this seems to be a little bit of a pattern, because the last forum that I went to, she did not show up. And then when the forum had sent her questions and given her the opportunity to film the responses to the questions that she was going to be asked at the forum, she did not send a video. I'm not going to give a opinion on what that means to me. That is just for anyone in the 9th district. That is what I personally have experienced with Laura Fine. So that's that on that. As I said, I will be having one, maybe two more people from the 9th district race on in the coming months, but this wraps up Illinois Candidate Month. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairsUnfilteredPod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and don't forget to film your local ICE agents for accountability purposes. I will see you guys next week.